This is ContraZoom, where we go back and forth about film. I'm your host, Dakota Arsenault. This is our second year covering the Hot Docs Film Festival, Canada's premier documentary film festival. This is the fest's 28th year, and just like last year, the screenings took place online. Joining me on the show is Rachel Ho, who last appeared on the show in episode 145, South by Southwest Film Festival 2021. We're going to talk about the great documentaries we got a chance to see. Rachel, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. How are you doing, Dakota?
I am excellent. In exciting news, you're joining the show now as a regular contributor. You won't be on every episode, but we're definitely going to be hearing plenty more from you going forward.
Yeah, I'm really excited for that. Thank you for agreeing to partner with me. I'm really excited
to have such great conversations. It made sense.
I'm excited though. It's gonna be great. I can get into a lot more things that we're both interested in, and maybe introduce each other to things that the other isn't. It'll be a good time.
Heck yeah. Now, this was your first Hot Docs. What did you think of the festival overall?
I really liked it. I'm a very casual documentary watcher. Like, if I hear that there's a big documentary out there, then I'll probably go take a look. But I'm not somebody that goes and seeks them out all the time. And watching Hot Docs, I realize I'm missing out on a lot, because there's a lot of like really great films out there that, you know, they're not scripted and they're not that, but they're absolutely fascinating. And they're always about pockets of the world or culture that I'm just not aware of. And that's the whole point of documentaries. Like, that's what makes them so great. So really happy with my experience, and hopefully we'll be watching more documentaries from that. How'd you find it?
Yeah, I totally agree. Like, last year was my first time covering it, and going last year, it was much more of I had a theme in mind. So we did music documentaries and then one about a movie. And so this time, I know at the beginning, you know, some behind the scenes, behind the curtain sort of stuff, we tried talking about doing some sort of a theme and looking at how we can structure the show. And so, like, my first pass through looking at all the different titles available, and you basically just have a log line of what the film is about. And it's like, oh, that sounds interesting. Oh yeah, that one sounds interesting too. And like, I was like, all right, no, try to keep it somewhat coordinated to have some sort of a theme. But, you know, I'll just look at everything just to see what's out there. And like, before I knew it, I had about like a list of probably about 40 to 50 movies where I'm like, I would be down to watch any of these. And I know we were going back and forth with like which ones we might try to go for and what we want to talk about and stuff like that. And we never really like ended up on doing some sort of a theme. And I think it worked out a little bit better because there was just too much great stuff. And I think in the end, we saw some really interesting movies.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't even think we covered even some of like the big ones too. Like, I think this is a bit that we missed, but that's just what makes those festivals so good, though, is because like you can never watch. I mean, I guess you could technically watch everything, but reasonably speaking, you're not going to be able to watch everything. And but that I think that's what's amazing. And so you have the list, and hopefully we can like keep an eye out. And if they get distribution or we watch them later, then you can always watch them afterwards. So it's nice having the list at the very least, knowing like what great documentaries are out there to watch.
Mm-hmm. And like, even the ones we didn't see, you're kind of paying a little bit more closer attention to what stuff is like trending on Twitter, or at least the stuff that the official Hot Docs account is like retweeting. And you're like, ooh, okay, if I see this one come up later on, if this pops up on Netflix or Amazon or whatever, yeah, I'll definitely check this one out then, because I heard good things about it months ago.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what's the great thing about film festivals in general. It's just like it gives great exposure to some of the more, I don't know, underground kind of ones that maybe aren't going to get a wide release, or, you know, and also because the smaller ones, maybe they pick up a lot of hype and then they do get on Netflix and Amazon, and that's awesome too.
Mm-hmm. I'm still hoping to like one day cover something and like a year later, it just like absolutely blows up. Like I've covered some stuff where I'm like, ooh, yeah, this is going to be like, this is, you know, X big director's next movie. I know this is going to be a big deal, but like any of the movies we covered today, none of them were like a big name director. I guess there was one that you did. Edgar Wright did a documentary, which obviously every film lover knows who Edgar Wright is. But other than that, like none of these are like big film directors where I would love to be like, oh, hey, next year at the Oscars, this was like the big breakout film by this filmmaker, or it like got picked up by A24 and is now being distributed by them or something like that. Like, that would be crazy.
That'd be cool. You know, you get in on the ground floor and you could be like, I knew it was cool before it was cool, kind of thing.
Yeah. Now, we ended up watching 5 movies. We both ended up watching 5 of the same movies, and then we also kind of watched a couple separately. So we're gonna start out by talking about the 5 that we saw together. Then we can have a bit of a conversation about it, and then we'll briefly sort of just mention the ones that we had saw separately. But we'll get right into this. And the first one we're going to talk about is a movie called Set, which was directed by Scott Gawlik. And I feel like I need you to describe this one because you actually did an interview with the director, and it's really fantastic. People need to check it out on rachelkh.com, where they can read all about it. But this was a wild one. So you set this one up.
Table setting is something that people take very seriously.
She is proud of her table arrangement and thinks she deserves a word of congratulation.
The point of having the table set in just the right fashion
Doesn't the butter knife belong here?
lets you take all stress away from people.
Stressing me out a little bit.
I don't even know what to do right now.
Tablescaping I would compare to brain surgery.
God, it's hard.
Oh, Jesus.
It's serious business.
15 minutes till forks down.
This is the Olympics of table setting. There are rules and regulations, and you follow those just like in a sport.
I love this one so much. So it's basically about competitive table setting. And I mean, full stop. What else do you need to say right there? Like competitive table setting.
I think you should explain what competitive table setting is.
So you got it's I don't say it's not a reality show, but there are reality show elements to it. And it's about a group of people in, I don't know, they're not all in Southern California, but it takes place in Orange County Fair. And they have, alongside all the other kind of wonky competitions that they have in a county fair, they also have table setting. And it's literally exactly what you think it is. It's who can come up with, the most beautiful, the most creative, the most interesting table setting. And you have to follow the rules. There's like very, very strict rules that you have to follow. And then there's a theme every year. And this year there were 2 themes. There was Light It Up and international travel. And most of the competitors did international travel. And so the documentary follows a group of the competitors and with kind of varying backgrounds and varying degrees of success as well in other competitions. And it goes through them prepping for the OC fair and then actually competing and seeing who wins. And when it sounds like it's something that you're not interested in, or it sounds really weird, I get that. But trust me, you'll get really, really interested in it. And you will develop feelings for table settings that you never knew existed within you, but you will get judgmental about them. And yeah, it's a great documentary. Like, I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed all the backstories of the different competitors and just the idea that there's something so random and so wonky that people could be that passionate about and put in that much effort. I just think is brilliant. I love that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I touched on my review, and like the thing that I really compared it to was the great Christopher Guest film, Best in Show. And it really feels like that, where, you get like all these talking head interviews with a bunch of the different contestants that they're following, and they're talking about how they got into it and what their passion is and what their style is and what makes them unique and all that sort of stuff. And then we like see them going about how they prepare for this competition, just like Best in Show. In Best in Show, they're talking about their dog and how they got into show dog competitions and the primping and the grooming and everything that they need to do, and then the road to the actual competition. It's the exact same format where, like, I swear if Eugene Levy and Catherine O'Hara popped up in this movie, I would go, aha, I knew this was all fake. But like, holy cow, this movie just like, I couldn't stop laughing just of like how absurd all of it is. But yeah, you get super invested. I think the other thing I was comparing it to, when I think I was talking with you about it when we're just chatting, and I was like, it's when you're watching the Olympics and you turn on some sport you've never watched before, and within an hour you've become an expert on that sport. You're like, oh no, come on, how can the ref call that not a foul? Like, what's the deal with that? Like, I'm a curling expert. Sure, I've never watched it in 4 years. Like, that's
or never even attempted to play to do curling. Like, you've never tried it once in your life, but you are now an expert on it. That's basically what.
Oh, I could do it so much better. Oh yeah. That guy's a bum. But like, that's what it felt like, and like even my wife came home from work, and it was towards the end during the judging portion of it. And, the judges are talking about, oh, yeah, and the spoon needs to be like this. And, oh, the napkin, you can't have anything on the napkin, all this sort of stuff. And like, I'm trying to like fill her in on like what the theme was and all that sort of stuff. And she starts having opinions on it too. I'm like, you weren't even here for the first half of this documentary.
Well, it's because it's relatable, but not at the same time. Like, I think anybody can have an opinion on, like, it's art. Like, I know it sounds, maybe to some people it sounds silly to call it art, but I genuinely think it is. Like, it's putting a lot of creative effort into this presentation of that happens to be a table setting. And I think that maybe sometimes, like, if there's a painting or, I don't know, performing arts, like some people might feel a bit, I don't know enough about painting. I don't know enough about like different art stuff. Like, I always joke with my friends that like, I don't art at all. Like, I go to art galleries and I'm like, I don't understand a lot of the stuff that's going on in here. But it looks cool. Like, I just, that's, my brain's never really worked that way. But I feel like table settings is a bit more accessible almost, because we all eat
We've
at
all sat
a table.
at a table.
Yeah, like you've sat at a table at some point in your life and, you've eaten. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you've had to have eaten at like a 5-star restaurant with the proper forks. Like, like the Titanic scene where they go, like, start from the outside and work your way in. Like, you don't have to have done that. But everybody's, if you've just sat down and had a plate of food put in front of you with forks and knives on either side, you can have an opinion on it. And I think that that's kind of what makes it such a compelling documentary. Like, it's kind of sneaky relatable in a way that you just don't expect it to be.
Or you've been to like someone's house when it's like a Christmas dinner and they have like a Christmas centerpiece going on and stuff like that, where once you realize that that's what like you're doing is you're setting the theme. You're like, oh yes, I'm sitting down, the meal matches what the theme of the table is, and the theme of the table matches what the food is supposed to be as well.
Yeah, it's true. It's and like people like the centerpieces and all those kinds of things, and it's that, but like times a million for what some of these guys do. It's incredible. I was really blown away by the creative. Like, you kind of don't think, how can you be creative about a table setting? But they managed to, and they managed to like put like layers of themes too. It's not just, international travel, so you just do something non-American, like that's kind of not the point. Like they actually, like, there's a bit more depth to it than that, which I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. And I think that's when you're watching it, when they start talking about what they want to do or what they can't do. And like some of it seemed a little ridiculous, like the woman who's looking for specific wine glasses and it need to be in a certain style. And you're like, oh, that's ridiculous. But then like you start thinking about it and like she's showing you the different options and you're like, you know what, based on what she's going for, yeah, that doesn't really work. And if I was in her position, I'd probably feel the same way. Maybe not to the point where I'm like, oh, they're at like a antique store and the guy's like, I think there's about 50,000 different kinds of wine glasses we have on this property. I'm like, yeah, you can find something in that amount.
But like the thing that I found interesting as well was you can have that extreme of like a person who's going to spend thousands and thousands of dollars on like Waterford crystal and like really, really top of the line wine glasses and water glasses and all that kind of stuff. But then on the other end, there was one of the contestants named Tim, who was on a much tighter budget than everybody else. And so he had gone to Dollar Tree and handmade everything, like paper mache, painted everything himself. And I personally really liked his the best. Partly probably because I just liked his backstory as well. But to me, it was interesting to see, like, look, on both ends of the spectrum, you don't necessarily need to have all this money to do to pursue your passion of, in this case, table setting. I think that that's kind of a nice message. And there was a review on Letterboxd. I actually brought this up to the director. There was a review on Letterboxd that went and talked, and like a few reviews actually, that basically were like, this is basically white privilege in America, on show right here. And they just kind of, and I was like, and Scott said this to me as well. He goes, you're kind of missing the point of the documentary. Like, nobody is saying that this is serious stuff. Nobody is saying that this is like meant to be taken that seriously. Yes, they're taking it seriously, but it's because that's what they're passionate about. And why not take your passion seriously, right? But that doesn't mean that we have to look at it and think, oh my God, like this is the be all end all of everything. It's, you know, but I also think that they did put in varying levels of income. So it's not necessarily just like, oh, it was a rich person thing. You know, it was open for anybody and everybody. But yeah, I found that really interesting when I was kind of looking around online about people's reactions to the documentary.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like there is a bit of a ridiculousness to it, but at the same time, like, just let people enjoy things. Like, come on. Like, sometimes I have such a problem with that where like I remember, like, I know this is completely off topic tangent, but like recently when Marvel put out that hype video and people were freaking out, and then I saw just as many people complaining about it. I'm like, oh my God, can you just not
really
just let people enjoy things? Like,
I had no idea people were complaining about it. Like, I had no idea. Oh, seriously. Wow. We're going to go off on a tangent there.
Yeah.
I just think like, look, it's like you said, just let people enjoy things. Like I didn't watch the hype video. I'm aware of its existence because I was on Twitter that day. And I think anybody that was on Twitter that day is aware of that clip existing, but I didn't watch it. Not because I don't like Marvel. Like I think I've pretty much watched all of the Marvel stuff, but I'm not as invested. Like I don't necessarily care what's coming up next. But at the same time, it's like, because I'm not in that boat, I just didn't watch it. And right. Like why, if you're not into it, I don't understand why you have to take time out of your day to bring down other people's, like, rain on people's parade. Like, just let people, like you said, let people enjoy things. And
Twitter I think that's one of the exist if that happened.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't know, but like one thing that's great about this documentary too is like, documentaries can be a real downer, which I'm sure we'll get into later because there's a few downer ones that we've done, but some of them can be just really heavy. Like the topics are really, really heavy, and that's good too. Like those are important things to discuss and be aware of. But sometimes it's nice to just kind of put a pause on all those things and watch something that's just fun. And then that is just, it is ridiculous, but it's the ridiculousness that kind of makes it great.
Yeah. This is the type of thing where like you read what the one sentence plot description is, and it's either going to absolutely jump out at you and be like, okay, I have no idea what this is, but I need to watch this. Or you're going to look at it and be like, that sounds like it's not my cup of tea. I'm just going to skip it and move on to something else. And like your mileage is definitely going to vary, but like it's hard not to enjoy a movie like this when like you're saying, sometimes you just want something a little bit more lighthearted. And once you get to know these people, and like some of them are absolutely kooky, and like I don't think I'd want to like sit down at their table to have a dinner with them, but at the same time, from a purely entertainment perspective, you can't help but not enjoy just like the pure insanity of like what they're trying to envision and accomplish. All right, so the next movie we're going to talk about is Rockfield, The Studio on the Farm, which was directed by Hannah Berryman.
Kingsley and Charles Ward are farmers who've gone into the pop business, converting the outbuildings of their farm into one of Europe's best-equipped recording centres.
That is when Rockfield became the world's first residential recording studios.
We'd never been in a studio. We'd never been on a farm.
Some of them lived with us. They were living in Nan's front bedroom.
Freddie is in there doing the finishing touches to Bohemian Rhapsody.
We turned the recording world upside down.
We had an instant feeling of we can do anything here.
And it's about how these two brothers in Wales turned their family farm into just about the most important rock recording studio in the 70s onwards, where they had bands like Black Sabbath and Robert Plant and Oasis and Coldplay and so many other bands have gone through there, and like staggering the amount of British music that was recorded there. And so it kind of documents the creation of the studio with a whole bunch of interviews from the artists themselves, and these two brothers are still alive, so they're able to kind of talk about it and just relive the sort of glory days and sort of see where they're at now and how much music history really ties into this one location. And as someone who's a sucker for both music docs and loves the type of music that is discussed in this film, I was really looking forward to it. And you get some really great anecdotes. Like it's really cool to learn like how the Bohemian Rhapsody piano section was written there when Freddie Mercury was busy tinkering away on a piano while the rest of the band was, I think they were playing Frisbee or something like that. And the guy that like runs the studio is like, hey, how come you guys aren't recording? He's like, oh, Freddie's doing something in there. And he goes over and he's writing, you know, one of literally the most famous songs ever. And listening to Chris Martin trying to figure out how to write a hit song because they're stuck in the labels paying for them to be there. And he looks up and he's from London. And normally in London, there's so much light pollution and smog pollution, you can't see anything. And he looks up and he sees all these yellow stars, yellow twinkling stars, and writes a song called Yellow. And like, so it was really cool to get those like one-to-one connection of like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. But other than that, like, I feel like there was a lot missing from this documentary where it could have just gone so much deeper. What were your feelings on it?
100% exactly what you said. Like, I was in complete agreement with you. It's like, it sounds like it should be like a much more interesting documentary than I think it ended up being. You know, this idea that there's this random farm in Wales, it's like the rolling valleys of Wales. Like, it doesn't equate that there would be a recording studio there that ended up birthing, you know, like you said, some of the greatest rock music and rock moments in music history. And yet it just felt very superficial somehow, even with all of the interesting stories and the many, many, you know, artists that they interview. It still feels just a bit like, okay, I don't know if I really learned that much. Like, you learn a bit, but not too much about Rockfield. Like, I feel like you learn more about the artists than you do about, you know, the recording studio itself, which I thought was just a bit of a shame, because I found the studio to be like such an interesting, like, these two brothers just decide, hey, we're gonna do this because they love music, and they tried to get their own record out there and it didn't work out, so they're like, all right, we're gonna go a different way. And then also too, I found it was, I mean, this might be a bit of a spoiler, but it's like, so the two brothers don't work together anymore, and they don't really address it. They just kind of say, yeah, we don't really work together anymore, and ended up falling out, and then that was it. Yeah, and you're just like, okay, cool. Like, you know, I don't know. It's not bad, but it's just very lackluster, I think. Like, kind of forgettable, as maybe rude as it is to say that. It's just, it doesn't feel, it didn't have the punch, I think, that it potentially could have, given the history of it.
Like, if you're a fan of any of the artists that are mentioned in this movie, you're gonna find it at least enjoyable. Like, if you hate rock music, if you have like no connection to Black Sabbath, you're gonna be like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Why did I just waste, you know, an hour and a half of my life on this? But like, if you want to know what Ozzy Osbourne thinks, and I was actually shocked at how much you can actually understand Ozzy Osbourne, because I remember a decade ago you couldn't understand a word he used to say in interviews,
which I think is very positive too, because like, I think he's taken great strides in like cleaning himself up and putting himself onto like a good road. So I think it's amazing. And like, I noticed that a lot of people commented on that too. Like, what happened to Ozzy Osbourne? Like, he is like a coherent person all of a sudden, which is amazing. Like, I think that's great.
Like, there, at least in my copy, there was still subtitles on it. And so like, I still would have to read them for him, but like, I can actually understand what he was saying, and he was making coherent thoughts, which was damn impressive, because it looked like he was not doing well at all in recent years. But I know he had gotten clean, especially since his breakup from Sharon, doing a lot better health wise. But yeah, that's a little besides the point. But like, yeah, a lot of it, like, I'm watching it and it's almost like, hey, I actually have more questions than you're answering. Can we kind of like rewind a little bit? And I believe the studio is still functional. Like, they still are recording artists there, but like, they just showed you parts of the studio, like, oh yeah, and this was the first iteration of the studio where we had it in our attic, and then here was the second iteration, and then we upgraded it. But then they like didn't show you what the modern studio really looks like.
Yeah, it's like, I think what you said is just more, you're left with more questions than you are answers. And you know, if you are really into any of those particular artists that happen to be interviewed in it, it's probably a great, actually, I don't even know how great it is. Like, I feel like it would give you like some fun fact anecdotes kind of thing. But I don't know if it would be something that's like, whoa, like that's incredible. Like, I'm a big Oasis fan. I'm a big Oasis fan. And so like seeing Liam in that, like that was pretty amusing to me. Like he's just really, really chill talking about like getting in a brawl with his brother, as they did all the time. Like that's just kind of what's the deal with Oasis. But like you're kind of like, yeah, I knew that. Like I knew that they didn't like each other, and I knew that they had recorded like What's the Story, Morning Glory over there. But there is actually, for any Oasis fans out there, if you are interested in Rockfield and its relation to Oasis, Noel Gallagher did a 30-minute documentary that's on Oasis's YouTube page, and it's called Return to Rockfield. And he revisits Rockfield and talks about recording the album. And it's really great, like, because I think it's more focused. Like, I think if you focus on one record or one artist's time, maybe it goes a bit more in depth into what makes Rockfield so magical, as opposed to trying to be like, look at all the great people that we've had come through here.
Yeah, it definitely felt like that a little bit. I don't know. For me, like, I've never been crazy about Oasis, but I definitely feel like I learned the most from Liam's interviews compared to everyone else. And like,
he's very honest too. Like he's just so like brash.
In your interview, you had sort of framed it as the documentary was kind of leading him to take a certain stance. But for me, I was watching it, and it really felt like to me that Liam was acknowledging that this time period of the band's career was the beginning of the end, and that he was partially responsible for it, in the sense of, well, the band was working because he only sings. He was out in town getting drunk and bringing people back to party while the rest of the band was still trying to work. And that was like one of the first major divisions between Noel and Liam. And so that I found very interesting.
Yeah. There's also a funny story about them recording Wonderwall and Liam being like, I need a wall. Like he literally wanted to record against a wall. And apparently that wall is like super famous now because it still exists. That's a very side point for Oasis people out there.
So the next movie we're going to talk about is Come Back Anytime, which was directed by John Dashback. This was also a really nice, pleasant, easygoing documentary, kind of like set even lower stakes though, where it's just about a Tokyo chef who owned a little ramen shop, a little hole in the wall with his wife, and he's getting a little bit older, and he's acknowledging that the shop isn't going to be around forever. He doesn't have an apprentice. He doesn't have anyone else that works for him. No one else really knows the recipe of how he does it. It's not like it's some super secret recipe, just he hasn't taught it to anyone. And he's acknowledged that when he retires, or if he probably has it his way, he'll probably work into the shop until he falls over dead. That's the end of this noodle shop. But the thing is, he's got regular customers who, like, it literally feels like it's a version of Cheers, where you have the exact same people come in every single day. They all know each other's name. They all know each other's orders. And even so, it like, despite it being a ramen shop, it's almost more of a social place where they're there to have some sake and like, oh, hey, and also, I guess I'm hungry now, so give me a bowl of noodles too. But it's such a gentle movie. There is no conflict. He's not up for any awards. He's not about to be kicked out by his landlord. He's not retiring at the end of the year. It's just one man kind of getting a little bit older and reliving his life and his work experience and how it relates to this tiny little community in Tokyo. And it's just like so relaxing, and it made me so hungry for ramen afterwards.
I love this one. Like, I think I wrote in my it's like in my review, it's like a big hug. Like, this is just such a really comforting documentary, like, and which is great because ramen is such a comforting food, and I think it's just excellent storytelling. Like, it doesn't necessarily, like you mentioned, doesn't have to have conflict. It doesn't need to be this big dramatic, oh, what's going to happen here? Like, what's going to happen? It's just about a man who, set up a ramen shop to support his family. And it happens to be really, really, really good. And they happen to develop these great relationships and form a community with the regulars. And it's just, lovely. Like, I think when you watched it, the thing that you texted me was like, you're like, it's delightful. And I'm like, that is the perfect word for what this is. It is delightful. Like, it's just such a nice film. And they have this really nice jazz score that's over the whole thing, which I think is such a perfect choice of music to use. And it's just throughout the entire thing. And it just feels like it's like a rainy day and you're listening to some jazz music and you've got, a nice warm bowl of ramen in front of you. And that's basically what the documentary feels like. And I think that's amazing that you can come away from a documentary like with a visceral feeling versus like, oh, I learned something, or like, oh my God, that's horrifying. Like that, like we need to do something about that. Like this was just, you come away from with just a very comforted feeling. And I think that's tremendous.
It's just so interesting of like how the conceit of the documentary is basically, it's kind of like a year in a life of him, because about every quarter of the way through the film, it'll be like, spring, summer, fall, winter. And so it's just like this 1 year in his life and how different times of the year he kind of does different things. Like he actually like brings his regular customers with him to go farming, which is crazy. Like he's like, oh yeah, I know this region in the mountains where you can get wild mountain yams. And so, I just bring some people from the shop and they help me dig up wild mountain yams, and we get some fresh rice from them as well. And we just make some food. And like that's the point of the story, is like, yeah, I bring my customers with me to go dig up some yams.
The great thing about the farming too is, I think when I first saw like he was, like tending to the grounds or whatever, the first thing I thought was, oh, so this is where he gets like his ingredients or something like that. Like that's what I thought it was leading to. Like oh, he like, wow, this guy's really intense. Like he cultivates his own, herbs and vegetables to put into the ramen broth and to serve to his customers. And then I'm like, oh no, this is just what he does for fun. Like it was just something that it's just something he enjoys doing. And I thought that's just, there's something really pleasant about that, where, maybe it's a generational thing. Maybe it's, I don't think it's a cultural thing, because I think the Japanese tend to be very hardcore about their work as well. But it's like, it's this idea of just be very present and be very, if there's, and it's kind of ties into set as well, which is, if there's something that you enjoy doing, just go and do it. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that makes you money. It doesn't have to be a career. It's just, if you enjoy it, go and do it. And I think that Come Back Anytime like just exemplifies that perfectly.
Mm-hmm. And like I don't know how to compare it, but a little bit to Rockfield, where a lot of what he was doing, I was like, oh, I have more questions about this that they don't really answer. But the end of the documentary, I didn't really care. Like he talks a little bit about how he makes his broth, where he's like, oh yeah, and here's my delivery of pork tenderloins, and then I just plop them in the broth, and then a few hours later they're ready. But like that's about it. He doesn't talk about how he makes his noodles. Like it shows him pouring ingredients into the pot to make the broth, but like we don't have any real connection with, hey, this is kind of what his recipe is. And it's not like, hey, I can't tell you what it is. It's just not included. Yeah.
And I think there's another documentary that came out quite a while ago now, I think, 2011. The Jiro Loves Sushi. Did you ever watch that one?
Yeah, Jiro Dreams of Sushi, yeah.
Dreams of Sushi, sorry, yeah. And that one, to me, is just like, I think it's going to be compared to it a lot, but to me, they're completely different documentaries. Like that one, it really goes into making the sushi and like the process. Mm-hmm. Like I always remember like the one of the chefs making eggs, and like he spent a year making eggs, and you're just like, wow, like they have that level of dedication. But like that documentary was very much so about the food and the restaurant, whereas Come Back Anytime, it's less about the ramen, even though it's put out there as a ramen documentary, but it's not really about the ramen. It's about the shop, and it's about the man, and it's about the company and his wife and his family. Like it's about a lot more than just the food. And I think that that's very refreshing, especially these days where like people are very food obsessed. Myself included. Like I love good food and I like eating, but I think it's kind of nice that this one isn't about like just really sexy shots of ramen. like really sexy shots of like the broth being made and things like that. Like it's a little bit more than just about the food. And I think that's kind of what separates it from Jiro and some other, food-based documentaries and films as well. I think that's what makes it so great.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like it almost falls into like the sort of subgenre movies of conflict-free movies of where almost as little happens as far as plot-wise goes. And like I think about My Neighbor Totoro kind of is sort of similar to that. There's a Jon Favreau movie, Chef, which is sort of similar where, there's a bit of inciting incident at the beginning and then the rest is just about him making food and that's all it is. But there's a few movies like that where every once in a while we're just like, I just need something that's relaxing and it isn't going to make me angry or make me sad or whatever. And I'm not like in a mood to just like laugh hysterically. I just want to be with a story. And this is the type of movie that is great for that.
100%.
So the next movie we watched, speaking of things that are hysterical, is a movie called Hysterical. That's a great transition that I did not plan at all, but I love it. And it's directed by Andrea Blaugrund-Nevins.
Men have always gotten to do things first. So by sheer numbers, more men have been doing comedy for longer because women for so long were expected to stay home, have children, and then die.
All right, we got a funny lady coming to the stage right now. Let's make some noise for her.
I've been introed, like the fact that I'm a woman is like a wacky experiment. They'll be like, we got a young lady coming up. Yeah, like, let's see how this goes down.
It is all about the world of women doing stand-up comedy. And it's a bit of an interesting one because it's not so much about the craft or how they got their starts or the rise. It really is. This is a little bit tricky to like make sure I'm explaining it correctly, but it's about their experiences of doing the act of stand-up comedy. Nothing to do with the actual performance of it, just what's it like being a woman in this industry that is dominated by men, where the bookers are all men, where the audience is for the most part men, all this sort of stuff is just so male dominated. And then you have this whole world of women who I feel like in the last decade or so have finally been able to break through in the mainstream of being like, hey, you know what? This idea of women are not funny is bullshit, and we're going to prove it to you. And we've been doing it for just as long as the men have. We just haven't been able to get the mainstream attention, the big comedy specials, the late night talk show guest spots, all that sort of stuff. They've always been there. And so this movie focuses on about 20 or so women who are sharing their stories. Some of them are, I don't want to call them old school, but definitely, we're coming around in the 80s and the 90s. And then you have people that like started getting big in like the mid 2000s. And then you have like some brand new comics who have only been doing it for a few years. So it's really nice to kind of see like this generational aspect of how it all unfolds for them. But I'm sort of curious to hear about what your thoughts are. Are you a big stand-up person to begin with?
I am. I actually really do love stand-up. I've always been, I've been like, I have a George Carlin record that I listen to every now and then. It's probably one of the most hipster things that I own is like a George Carlin vinyl. I'm just like, yeah, I listen to that. But yeah, I love stand-up, and it's always been the ones that you and I are similar in age, and it's like we grew up, it's pretty much been men, right? Like it's you grow up in a time when, I mean, I hate to say his name, it's like Bill Cosby was around. You had Seinfeld, you had Pryor,
Chris
Eddie
Rock.
Murphy. Eddie Murphy was probably the biggest one, I think, really, like with Raw and Delirious. And it's like, I never grew up with the idea that women can't be funny, but it was always just this idea of, women aren't given the same, or like, not that they're not given the same, it's just, it was almost as if women shouldn't be doing those things. Like they have a great clip with Jerry Lewis in Hysterical, in that documentary.
That one made me real angry.
Yeah, where he was like, women shouldn't. He's basically saying women shouldn't be doing this. Like it's unbecoming of a woman to go up there and tell jokes, whether it's about yourself or about your experiences or about the world as you see it. Like Jerry Lewis was like, nope, that is not in a woman's place. And I think that for a long time, that's basically, however subconsciously, I think that's how a lot of people felt. So even when it came to like forget stand-ups, like just female comedic actresses. Like it was never, they usually had to be a certain type of person in order to be accepted. Like I'm thinking Melissa McCarthy, and it's like, and that made it okay. But like you couldn't have somebody who was like very conventionally knockout, glam, beautiful, right? Not to say Melissa McCarthy isn't beautiful, she is, but I'm just saying like that kind of more traditional ideal of what beauty is. Those women can't be funny. Like that's not their thing. So I think Hysterical, it's like it touches on a lot of things that came out of the Me Too movement, where women can speak up now and say, yeah, it actually really does suck. Because I think for a lot of the women too, it's, if you were in that industry, you didn't want to say it because you didn't want to put more attention on yourself that like you are a woman, even though obviously you are, right? And so there's a lot of respect to be given to like Margaret Cho and Kathy Griffin, who were both in the documentary, for doing it at a time that it was far more difficult, and you really did have to be quote unquote one of the guys. And who knows, the types of comments and things like that were put towards them, and they just kind of have to brush it off, because if this is what you want to do for a living, well, you kind of have to play the game and play along their rules, because that's what is dominant. So, Hysterical, I think, did a good job of going over the history of it and looking at from, I think they go back as far as even the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and then looking at the new comics. And it's an interesting documentary. I found it, like, the topic is very topical at the moment. Like people like to hear about these things. And for me though, it kind of lacked any punch, just because I feel like all of the stuff that was in it, I knew about it. Like I was aware of the Harvey Weinstein thing and Kathy Griffin with the, when she got brought down because of what happened with that Trump model head or whatever.
Photo shoot she did.
Yeah. And so like, I just found none of it to be that like, oh my God, like, wow, like that's crazy. Like, I didn't know that. Like, I feel like all those things I did know, but then that's just me. Like, there might be a lot of people out there who weren't aware of a lot of these stories or a lot of the situation, that hopefully this gives them some light on it.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like I'm sort of a similar boat as you. I was familiar with the Kathy Griffin incident, and like I've known for a long time about like the hardships that Margaret Cho has had to face, not only being one of the first really prominent women comedians, but also with her Asian background as well. Just the amount of racism that she had to endure on top of the sexism, and the fact that like she's someone that has very openly struggled with her weight as well. And so like, just like sort of all those things kind of compiled, like as a fan of stand-up comedy and not just watching it, but also knowing a bit behind the scenes too, I was aware of a lot of these stories. So a lot of it wasn't really groundbreaking for me. It was really nice to kind of hear them all be able to kind of talk shop together. And I think my favorite parts of it were showing the archival footage, not just of the people that are featured in this film, where you're seeing like their early stand-up and how they kind of got started, but also like some classic comedians of like what their work was like, of people that like I didn't really know about. Like I knew the name Moms Mabley, and like I think I've seen bits and pieces of her, but like they show a few clips of her back in the 50s and 60s. And that was really cool to be able to see that. For me, that's what was enjoyable. So if it was more like a documentary about the history of where stand-up comedy has come from and is going with women as the forefront of it, I think that would be even more interesting to me.
Yeah, I agree. That's actually probably a really interesting take on it. I mean, they do go over it a little bit, but not really in depth. They show it, like you said, in the archives. Like they just kind of show you that, but they don't really go too much into the backstories of those things. Because you're right, that would be a fascinating thing to see. Like, even though, not to be like, oh, we should be grateful for where we are, but it's important, I think, to realize like the improvements that have been made, like the progress that has been made.
Whose shoulders are you standing on, basically, sort of thing.
Exactly, yeah. And so I think that would have been interesting. Like it's a good documentary. It's a good film. And if anything, it's kind of nice that it's memorialized in some way. That like it exists. Like it's nice that it exists so that if in 20, 50 years time, people want to look back and be like, oh, like how far, like that, at least something like this exists to say, like to kind of put it all together. So that might be a positive that comes out of it. Yeah.
So there's two things I kind of want to touch on. One of them is clearly this movie was started to be shot a while ago, but it looks like it was finished in the last year. So it starts out with a whole bunch of sit-down interviews, but clearly as the film is progressing, they slowly start switching to Zoom interviews. Did that bug you? Did that work for you? Because as soon as it sort of switched to the Zoom interviews, it just one of those reminders of like, oh yeah, this was made during COVID and COVID's still going on and all that sort of stuff. From a filmmaking perspective, at least.
I'll be honest, like I noticed it, but it didn't register in my head as being something off. Like, and that just is probably a testament to how often I see Zoom stuff now, or like, you know, are in a Zoom chat, I think. That you actually just put me for a bit of a spin there. It's like I've very much so normalized seeing like a Zoom interview in a movie. And is that... Yeah, I actually didn't really... It didn't pull me out of it. Like, I'll say that. It didn't pull me out of it at all. And, I mean, like, knock on wood, we're not doing this for very much longer, but it's kind of interesting. Like, it's going to be like a bit of a thumbprint for movies that were made, or documentaries in particular that were made during this time, that it is going to be filmed in that way. Because you watched one during South by Southwest that was all done over Zoom, wasn't it? It was all like all the interviews and everything was done over Zoom. I don't know. That's actually a really good point. I didn't really think about that. Would you have preferred them to have just kind of like, you know, rather than having the Zoom, like maybe they could have just recorded some voiceover and then they could have just laid it over video? Would you have rathered that, or...
Maybe, I don't know. Like, I think it's just more something that like kind of stood out, where if you're doing the Zoom route, go the whole way. But if you're filming in person, like it just would have been much nicer if it was all in-person interviews. And it's sort of funny where like I would notice they would be interviewing someone and then they would cut to them doing some stand-up. And I was like, hey, they're wearing the exact same outfit. Oh, I know what they did. They just filmed them on the day that they were in town to do a special or whatever it was. Like, I noticed it with Fortune Feimster. I was like, hey, you're wearing that same plaid blue button-up in both your interview and on stage. How'd that work out?
That's really interesting. I didn't notice those things. You got a good eye.
Maybe it's just me.
No, that's incredible that you have an eye like that. I think that's pretty cool. I definitely didn't notice those things.
Okay. But the second thing I wanted to bring up was Amy Schumer. Like, she clearly plays a very important role in this movie. She's mentioned a bunch of times as far as giving the opportunity to a lot of women to both be writers on her show that no longer is on the air or also appear on it. And, you know, there's a segment when Kathy Griffin's talking about the fallout she was receiving. She received a video from Amy Schumer and a couple of the other stand-ups that are featured in this video just voicing their support for her. And it almost seems like quite a bit of time they're trying to just dance around the subject of her, because you can't really make a movie about the rise of mainstream popularity of female stand-ups and not include Amy Schumer, because she is the #1 female stand-up comic right now of the last few years. And so it almost feels like they maybe tried to get her and she either wasn't interested or wasn't available or whatever. And so they just tried to cut around her as much as possible, but it's impossible to not talk about her at the same time. So that was very interesting and kind of stood out for me. Did that stand out for you at all?
That did, yeah. I know Amy Schumer, I'd say Ali Wong not being in there, and Sarah Silverman.
Yeah.
That was a big one that I was kind of surprised that we didn't see them like actively participating in the documentary. And I don't know, I mean, we could kind of theorize why. I know Amy Schumer had a baby recently. I don't know if that I don't know about the timelines on that. Maybe that kind of affected it a little bit, but I also have a thought that maybe they don't want to take part in something like this because they're kind of sick of talking about it. You know, maybe they just don't want to, they just don't want to be a part of it because they're just saying like, aren't we done with this topic? Like, can we not move on and just exist as stand-ups? Like, do we need to keep berating this topic? And even though they're not, I don't think they're stand-ups, but I don't know. I don't think they've ever done stand-up. But even having someone like Tina Fey and Amy Poehler, those are two women in the comedy space, like skit-wise, obviously within SNL, but like they're really important to the discussion as well, and they're not in it either. So I mean, no documentary I think can get everybody in it, but you're right. Like there are some very glaring absences from it, and I think Amy Schumer and Sarah Silverman to me were the two that really surprised me that they weren't in it, because I thought that they would have taken that opportunity to do it. But yeah, who knows? I mean, do you have any thinking of why they might not have wanted to do it if they didn't want to do it?
The only thing I can think of is that she either wasn't available or didn't want to do it. Yeah. And I don't know why she wouldn't want to do it, considering all of her other contemporaries are in it. Mm-hmm. And it's not like it would be a negative sort of thing. So it just must be she just wasn't available. Like that's the only thing that I can think about that prevented her from being in it, because it's not like, hey, we want to focus on more up and coming people. It's like, well, if that's the case, then why did you focus on, some other really well-known
like Nikki Glaser was in it.
Yeah. Nikki Glaser or Eliza Schlesinger. They're both fairly big in the comedy world these days. I get what you're saying about Sarah Silverman too. I guess like, I don't know, maybe even someone like Wanda Sykes, I feel like she was shown a couple times in it.
Yeah, Wanda Sykes.
But if they're going like, oh, hey, we already got someone from like the 90s and 2000s when she was at her peak, maybe they're like, oh, we have that era covered. But like, she was still probably the biggest name at the time as well. So like,
I would think like there aren't that, like the whole point is there aren't that many female stand-ups. Like there really aren't, especially the ones that have been able to make it quite big and prior to the last, say, 5 years. Like there's not too many of them that don't have it. So I don't know. I mean, I think it was Nikki Glaser when they asked her like about being like women being funny. And I think they posed the question as, where do you think the idea that women can't be funny comes from? And I'm pretty sure it's Nikki Glaser. And she goes, I thought we weren't talking about that. She's like, I thought we weren't going to talk about that. And he goes, no. I'm not asking you like why women can't be funny. I'm asking you, where do you think the idea came from? And it's just like a bit of a roundabout way of asking the exact same question. But I can sense that, because I feel the same way too sometimes, where I'm like, do we need to keep prattling on about women being funny? Like, is that something that is that really something we need to keep talking about? One of the greatest sitcoms, like one of the greatest comedic things on television that has happened in the last 10 years was Veep. And that was all because of Julia Louis-Dreyfus. So it's like, I don't know if we really need to keep talking about this, but evidently we do. I don't know.
At the point where you either believe that, you either still believe that, or you never believe that. So
it's
like,
true.
It's not going to change anything. And like, I'm not going to watch Hysterical being like, I don't believe women are funny. The documentary changed my mind.
Exactly. Like
no one is going to watch this movie with that.
And also, it's like, if you already don't think women are funny, you're not going to watch Hysterical. Like, that's not going to be something that you're like, oh, this seems like a great thing that's right up my street. Like, and I think that it's great having these kind of social issues, having a spotlight and more people talking about it. But the even greater thing would be if it just stopped, because not because we're quiet about it, not because it all just kind of, but it's just because it's just normal and there's nothing more to talk about it. And I think if anything, it's encouraging that after watching Hysterical, I kind of went, yeah, like there's nothing new to say, which is great, because that means maybe we can just move on now and just let female stand-up, not to say like they will always continue to be a specific type of barrier that females will have in the stand-up world than men have. That's just, I don't know if that will ever change, unfortunately, but I don't think that it is a full stop. No, you cannot come, like you can't sit at this table anymore. Like I don't think that exists anymore. I think if you're good, you're good. And, there's plenty of male comics out there who say the same thing. Like, no, there's no, like Jerry Lewis doesn't exist anymore. Like that type of thinking, I don't think exists anymore. Thank God.
All right. So the last movie that we both saw together was The Most Beautiful Boy in the World, directed by Christiane Petri and Christina Lindstrom.
In 1970, Luchino Visconti went around the world to find the perfect beauty for the lead in his upcoming film, Death in Venice.
Quel âge a-t-il? Il est très grand, hein? De taille, 15 cm. Il est très beau. Dis-lui d'enlever son pullover.
This was a very interesting movie. This is it tells a story about how a young 15-year-old boy is cast in a Luciano Visconti film, Death in Venice, who is cast specifically because he is really, really, really ridiculously good looking. And the sort of life that this boy has to endure and the people around him and all the sort of struggles he faces trying to live up to that moniker, and then his life afterwards. And then you sort of also realize, wow, he has a lot that has gone wrong in his life, and this is someone that's probably not going to turn out completely well adjusted. And yeah, it turns out this is someone that didn't turn out completely well adjusted, and just sort of how he's putting his life together. And so it tells the story of Bjorn Andersen. And I gotta say, like, you know, I didn't really know much about it other than like what the title and the subject line was about. But like, sure enough, as soon as they showed him on screen, I was like, oh my gosh, this boy really is beautiful. But then you remember that like it's a 15-year-old boy. Why were they putting him through this like hypersexualization at that age? Which, you know, history has shown that the media will do that with every 15, 16-year-old boy, girl, whatever.
Yeah, it was, we were chatting a little bit about this before we started recording. It's like the first, 10 minutes of this are just so uncomfortably creepy. Like they use the archival footage of Bjorn's audition for that movie, for Death in Venice. And it's just uncomfortable. And it's not even just him. I think they showed a couple boys before him. And it's the way that the director is talking about them. It's just like, they're all teenagers. They're all young boys. And
he was older too, because they were talking about that he was being older than the others.
And Visconti is just going on saying, you know, oh yeah, he's very, very pretty. Like he's very, very, very pretty, very pretty. Okay. Can you tell him to look, because there was a bit of a language barrier. So you tell the translator, tell him to turn his head this way. Tell him tell him to take his shirt off. I need to see him half naked. And like Bjorn, you could see it in his face. He's like, "Excuse me, you want me to do what? Like what? Like oh, I have to take my shirt off for you. Like how is that okay? How is that ever okay? Like I know that this is the 70s, and people always like to say like, oh, it was a different time. Yeah, I get that it was a different time, but like that still was not okay. Like that is not an okay thing to be that, you know, objectifying a child. Like he's a kid. Doing it that way, and it was so uncomfortable. And then, you know, seeing him in adulthood and how much it affected his life, that is, you know, that's always, it's hard to see. I think it's really hard to it's hard to reconcile sometimes, and it's like it can be sad and depressing and pretty dark. I really enjoyed the documentary just because I thought it was interesting. You know, we do this. Every generation has a young star that they hold up and objectify in a way that is, when you look back on it, you go, yeah, that's not cool. I mean, we grew up with Britney Spears being that person, but even Emma Watson, like I'm not a huge Harry Potter person, but like Emma Watson was, I think 9 or 10 when she started doing Harry Potter or something like that. Like she was really young, and there were grown men who were like fawning over her, and you're like, it's so wrong. So it's like, don't tell me it was a different time, because that stuff still happens today. So it's not about the time period. It's more about, you know, I hate to say like, oh, it's the system, but it kind of is. Like it's about the entertainment industry and the media as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, like in recent years, like Billie Eilish right now going on. And then a couple of years ago, it would be like the kids from One Direction or Justin Bieber. Like there's always going to be teen heartthrobs, if you want to call them that, of any gender. And for some reason, the world is just going to absolutely idolize them for one thing only, and that's their looks.
Yeah. And, you know, talent is, but I was going to say talent, maybe he was very talented, but I'm not trying to say that Bjorn Andresen wasn't talented, but from the clips that they show in the movie, he doesn't really talk very much in the film. Like he's just there as, and I read I haven't seen Death in Venice, but I was reading like the plot summary of it on Wiki, and it's like the whole thing is just an adult man just staring at this kid while they're on vacation in Venice. And like, he doesn't say anything. He just literally runs around the beach, and he's just a part of, like, he's just the object in the gaze, basically, which is super creepy. Like, and I know from 15 to 18, what are we talking about here? But like, you could have gotten an adult who could have made their own decision. I think that's the other thing that makes it a bit heartbreaking as well, is the fact that, it wasn't his choice. He didn't want to be a child actor. Like, it was something his grandmother had pushed him into. Whereas some other child stars, like, Justin Bieber is a good example, is like, I think he wanted to be a singer. He wanted to be a big pop star. So it's a bit different when you have somebody who goes, I didn't really want to do this. Yeah,
absolutely. And everything that they show of the clips from Death in Venice, they talk about his presence, and like, yeah, he has a presence. He's like got really striking eyes that really hit you instantly. He's got nice, like, wavy long hair and stuff like that. That he's like, unquestionably, this is, an attractive young person sort of thing. But like, that really is everything that he does in this movie. That's all it seems like. I don't really see any sort of real acting range, and this isn't any sort of a critique against him, but like, just of what the entire purpose of him being there was for, and the fact that it's not like Visconti was like going on a multi-year search to find literally the most beautiful boy in the world, and going to all these different countries. He talks about how Sweden is like, the X number of countries he's been to after being all over the place. And how he hasn't seen any boy that fits his standards of the most beautiful boy in the world. It gets really weird really quickly. And of course, it's going to mess someone up. And, it adds to the fact that as he got older, it seemed like he had some troubling issues with the different people in his life, whether it was his grandmother or his mother, or when he finally, had a family and he loses his son and that sort of stuff, where it gets really tough. And his daughter is in it, and clearly they've made amends in their relationship, but he was not any sort of real father figure for her while she was growing up. And so this is someone that really has been tormented by the demons that came into play when he was 15 years old and thrust into spotlight for one thing.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing to think it was just one movie. Like, it was just this kind of 1 or 2 years that really, sent him over. I don't want to say sent him over the edge, but I mean, he admits to having some substance abuse issues and things like that as he got older. And, I think it's not difficult to draw a line between those problems and the 1 to 2 years that he had under such immense spotlight. But it's a dark documentary, because I think we're all aware that it still happens, and we know that it does. And try as we might, like, sometimes, every time that you click on something about, like, Amanda Bynes, having a bit of a meltdown or whatever, it's like we're adding to that. We're kind of the problem in that sense. And I think the documentary, I don't know if it's looking to make that sort of statement, like to make a broader argument or shed light onto a broader subject, but that was certainly what I took away from it, which was just like, look at what can happen, because we can see it in real time with certain singers. I know Britney Spears is kind of having her moments these days with the different documentaries that are being made about her, but it's very different from, you're talking 50 years later. He can really fully see everything for what it was. And it was interesting, there was one scene, I think he's talking to his girlfriend, and she's getting very bothered by it. Like, she's very upset by, what had happened with him, and telling him to go to clubs and all that stuff as a young boy. And he's just like, it was 50 years ago. Like, it's fine. Like, and she's like, no, it's still not right. It's still not right. And yeah, I was very moved by this one, though. I thought it was really well done as well.
All right. Now, we each saw a couple films independently of each other. So if you want to maybe list off which ones you saw, if there's any, like, 1 or 2 you quickly want to highlight, I'd love to hear about them.
Sure. So the other 4 that I watched were Writing with Fire, which is an excellent documentary about an all-female run newspaper in India. And not just all-female, but the women are a part of the lowest caste group in India, called the I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but the Dalit, also known as Untouchables. I think that most of us in the West, like if you've ever heard of it, that you probably heard of it as the Untouchable caste group. So it's about this group of women who have formed a news agency, a newspaper, and they go around India and cover, from mining protests to putting lights on like rape cases. They had an election a few years ago. And it shows them, the reporters going through and being the only women in the newsrooms, being quote unquote mansplained to, and disrespected and being told like you just got to get married, like you're shaming your family. And it's a really great one. Like I had no idea about this topic. I had no idea about this news group, and they have a YouTube page and everything like that. Like it's a really, really inspiring documentary that just shows like these women are, even though they're being told like just get married, have babies, take care of your house, they are determined to get a better education, to get better at their jobs, and to make a difference in their country, and maybe even change, the country to get them out of this caste system situation that they're in, that they've been in since, I didn't realize it, but they wrote in the documentary, like from 1500 BC, like this has existed. It's an incredible documentary. Highly recommend it. It's called Writing with Fire. There was another one I watched called A.rtificial I.mmortality, which talks about living forever as an AI or as an android. And this is a Canadian documentary. It's the director is Anne Shin, and it's really I'm really into like techie privacy AI stuff. So this was right up my street and just something I thought was absolutely fascinating. And it was, Anne actually goes on like a journey of uploading her experiences and her stories and her thoughts into an android for her kids to see. And it's so uncomfortable and so creepy, but it's fascinating because this is a part of like, this is what the future is holding. Like, we don't know what AI is going to look like. And, is it going to be something like, like iRobot, or, are we going to go as far as like Minority Report? Like those kinds of, I always think of like movies and that, like, how far are we going to take this? But it's a really great snapshot of looking at where we are right now. Like, where is the AI technology? And it's actually, I think, a lot further along than people realize. And it looks a bit into what could the future, what possibilities could we have in the future with AI? And it's, I really enjoyed it. And if you're into tech stuff, if you're into AI, if you're into privacy, if you're into all that kind of jazz, A.rtificial I.mmortality, it's a really, really good one. Check out. And then I watched a WeWork documentary. It's got a really long title. WeWork, or the...
Don't feel the need to say it all.
It's so ridiculous. Like, I just find it... Like, the title is as ridiculous as WeWork is. If you're familiar with WeWork, it was it still is, it's an American work sharing place. Like, it was a real estate company, basically, that rented out a bunch of office spaces and created the very, very kind of millennial entrepreneur startup vibe. Like, there's like ping pong tables, there's free beer, there's snacks and all that stuff. And it's basically about the downfall of the company and the co-founder, Adam Newman. And it was okay. Like, I was really interested. This was one that I was really looking forward to. And after watching it, like, it's all right. It's interesting. If you're interested in WeWork, if you've ever worked in a WeWork, it's kind of, I think I wrote somebody said it's like Firefest gone right. And the last one I saw was probably the most, aside from Summer of Soul, I would say it was one of the more famous documentaries at Hot Docs this year, which was the Sparks Brothers. And this was Edgar Wright's first documentary that he's ever done. And he chose to do it about a duo from America, from California, called Sparks. And it's two brothers, and they've been working since the 60s. And I'd never heard of them. Have you heard of them? I know you're really into music. So did you know about the Sparks?
I only heard of them a few years ago when they did a tour and collaboration album with Franz Ferdinand, and they called themselves FFS. So that was my only knowledge of them. And I think that's the only music of theirs I've heard as well.
Yeah. So like, that's kind of their whole shtick in a way, is like they're the band, like the quote is like your favorite band's favorite band. Like they're the band that us in the normal world have never heard of, but those people who are in the music industry, like who are actually working within the music industry, they know Sparks and they love Sparks. And Sparks apparently has had an influence on rock that is very much so unknown to most people. They even say, like, they went as far in the documentary to say, like, there are some bands who are working today who don't realize that they have been influenced by Sparks. So it's a cool documentary. It's got very Edgar Wright flavor. So if you like his kind of sense of humor and his sensibilities, it's very much so in keeping with that. And they interview a ton of fans, and like Mike Myers is in there, and then they've got some other bands as well. Like Beck is in there. He's not a band, he's one person. They got Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers. I think who else was in there? But I know like the Sex Pistols have been influenced by them, the Smiths, Bjork, even Kurt Cobain at some point. Like he talks about Sparks. Paul McCartney, I think, also gives them a shout out. So it's the band that you didn't know about, but apparently has had a massive influence over the music industry.
Yeah, I was very disappointed that I didn't get to see that one because I love Edgar Wright.
Yeah,
and well, like I said, I don't know a ton about Sparks, but like this is obviously something right up my alley, and I probably would really enjoy it. And I really regret that I let the link time out and missed it. So,
this was the one that I was like, oh, I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I watched it specifically because I thought, oh, Dakota's going to watch this one, so I'll watch it too, like just to make sure, like, so we both got this one. And then when you found out, I was like, oh, well, I was like, at least one of us watched it. It's fine. It's fine. But yeah, it was good though. It's a good one. I'm sure you're going to get a chance to watch it later. Like it'll come out somewhere, somehow.
Yeah, this is 100% going to get a wide release, whether it's on a streaming platform or in theaters or something. This is going to be one that's going to be known by people.
For sure. Actually, I'm sorry, I'm just realized I'm looking at my notes now, and they do have a theater date. So June 18, it's going to be coming out in theaters. I'm not sure what that looks like in Canada, obviously with everyone's lockdown situation, but yeah, maybe on digital for us.
Well, I saw 3 other documentaries. Well, 2, and then one was the first 2 episodes of a TV series. I'll start with that one first. It was called The Caviar Connection. Really interesting. It was talking about Azerbaijan and how there's this idea of caviar diplomacy, which is basically you shower wealth on people, things like caviar, and they will start supporting or promoting your country to the point where you get widespread acceptance in the diplomatic community. And so there's several countries in the Azerbaijan region that sort of do this, where they have dictators that are running the show, and they like will pay Lady Gaga to come and do a concert, or they'll pay F1 to be able to host an F1 race in Baku and all that sort of stuff, and just sort of the corruption that goes on in order to get themselves legitimized in the world, to the point where there was an election and the results got leaked a day before the election happened.
Oh my God.
Another movie I watched is called We Are the Thousand. It was about how this small Italian village wanted to get the Foo Fighters to play a show in their tiny little town. So the best way to attract them was to get 1,000 musicians to play one of their songs. And so they get all these people together in a giant field, and they play Fly. And sure enough, it attracts the Foo Fighters, but that's only the first half of the documentary. It's more so about this community of people who, you know, the people who aren't able to be professional musicians, but still have this immense love for a hobby that they love to do, but have no real avenue for it. Realize that there's an entire community of people that are the exact same way, because we all know people that, you know, play guitar or piano or whatever, and they're not doing it in a band. They just do it because they enjoy music. They love playing music, and they've never had any sort of opportunity to play for anyone. And this was an opportunity for people to come together in a group of 1,000 people to just all come together and really share their passions together. So it was very interesting, and I got a little emotional at certain points of it. But it's just like a super fluff documentary. The last one I saw was Withdrawn Arms, which was the most interesting and one that had a lot of feelings. And if you like what I'm saying at all or don't like what I'm saying at all, I wrote a review about it that kind of goes into it a lot more.
1968. Black athletes were expected to perform and shut up. We were dealing with racism. We were dealing with not having a voice. Running became my voice. I knew something had to be done. My next move would be immortalized in history.
But like at the 1968 Olympics, a lot of people have seen this image when 2 Black American athletes won a medal. They stood on the podium during the national anthem and did the Black Power salute. That is one of the most indelible civil rights images ever. Like, I liken it to the fact that this idea of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, we know their speeches, we know what they sound like, and we have the videos of it. So we have that sort of audio-visual component to it. And then, you know, compared to someone like Rosa Parks, there's no photos, there's no, you know, video of it. We just know the story of her refusing to move to the back of the bus. We know that story. It's a tale that is easily passed on and transcribed, and you understand the meaning of it. Whereas this might be the most impactful image of the civil rights movement. Like, I imagine you've seen this image, right?
Yep.
Yeah, this is the sort of thing where like everyone is seeing it. It's in history textbooks. You see it anytime they talk about sports as a form of protest, things like that. It's so well known. Just me saying 2 Black athletes with a Black Power salute on the Olympic podium. You know exactly what photo I'm talking about. But do you know anything else about them? Because I absolutely did not. I didn't know their names. I didn't know their stories. I didn't know what happened to them afterward, before, none of that stuff. So this movie tells the story of the man who won the gold medal, Tommy Smith, and his involvement with protesting during the civil rights movement beforehand, his plan to do something at the Olympics, and then how it completely affected his life. Because as he mentioned, when you are making a statement, a certain level of sacrifice will always have to come. And his sacrifice was not being able to live a normal life afterwards. It was almost impossible for him to maintain any sort of steady work. He went through 2 marriages. He had a mental breakdown, a whole bunch of stuff. But he's come through on the other side, and he's obviously in a much better place. But like so many people of color, their accomplishments are so often marginalized. And he is wanting to leave a legacy of people remembering who he is, and not just that one photo. And so he was working with a visual artist to sort of create an exhibition commemorating his life and transforming that photo into a more modern day form of both protest and art. And he does a great job with the art. There's some fantastic stuff, but boy, do I just have so many issues with the documentary, the filmmaking aspects as a whole. And it's funny. I was texting you. I was like, wow, I had a lot of thoughts about this movie. And you texted me afterwards. You read my review. Like, oh, wow, I thought you had good thoughts about the movie.
Yeah. I thought it was going to be one of those like, wow, I was so moved by this. Like, this is amazing. Like this. And then when I read your review, I went, oh, no, it wasn't very good, was it? Which is honestly such a shame, because like you so beautifully just said, like, that is such a historic image. It's such an iconic picture that even if you don't know anything about it, you know about it. Like we've seen it so many times, and especially in our current state, like what's going on in the world right now, it is such a great topic to really dive into. So it's so disappointing to hear that they didn't quite stick the landing on it.
My real biggest gripe about it is that there were 2 men on that podium, and obviously it's completely fine that they choose to make a documentary about just one of them. They chose the gold medal winner. He's the one, I imagine he was the one that was sort of setting in motion, wanting to keep this as his legacy because of what the whole project was about. But the other athlete, John Carlos, is almost never mentioned. He's talked about at the beginning when they're saying, oh, these were the contenders to make the U.S. Olympic team. It was such a strong field for the track team. And both Tommy and John made it. And then Tommy and John both have a black glove on their hands on the podium, and they raise their fists proudly in the air. And then that's basically it. We don't I want to know what happened to him afterwards. Did he struggle getting work? Did he face similar issues with any sort of substance? Did he have marital issues? All this sort of stuff. What sort of backlash did he receive? I don't need an interview with him for them to acknowledge his existence, but the fact that they just completely ignored him, almost in the same way Hysterical tried to edit around Amy Schumer not being in that movie. They completely edited around John Carlos not being in Withdrawn Arms. Where were everyone else in the story? It was just focused far too much on one person, and it just really sort of bugged me that while this one story about Tommy was fantastic and him telling his story was so moving, and like I got emotional and I cried a few times during it, but he wasn't the only one in this story. This that just sort of bugged me, along with several other like small filmmaking aspects where it just really sort of felt like the directors, there was two of them, started with the end point and then tried to film their way to the end.
Yeah, see, and that's never a good way to do a documentary, is it? Because unlike like a feature film where it's like, okay, if you know what the ending of your movie is, that's great. But for a documentary, it's like it's supposed to be like the whole film is supposed to be like a journey into what is the end point, not. And I guess maybe that's why you have such a big problem with it, because it feels more contrived. It doesn't feel like an honest depiction of what happened or an honest recounting of what happened, because it's like they're clearly trying to skirt around some issues, maybe sanitize it a little bit. Who knows? Like that's the whole thing, is we don't know because they didn't put it in there. And then if you're trying really hard to get to an end point, well, then the whole thing just feels a bit false, and documentaries are not supposed to be false. Like maybe that would have been better as a feature film then, if they wanted to do it that way, like create a script and do it that, make that into a movie. It's actually, now that I'm saying it, it's kind of shocking they haven't made that into a movie yet, or have they? And I just missed it. Not
that I'm aware of.
Because you would think that would be something they would make it maybe now. But yeah, I mean that's really too bad, because like I said, it's an interesting period of Olympic history, social history, and given what's going on right now, it would have been a great time for them to bring that back up and really tell like the true story. Like, this is exactly what happened behind the scenes of it all, and this is what happened afterwards and the fallout. That's too bad, though.
Well, obviously the big ones, there's two big documentaries that played during Hot Docs. One was the Edgar Wright Sparks Brothers documentary. The other one was Questlove's Summer of Soul. But this might be the next most high profile one, both sort of in terms of subject matter, but John Legend was the producer on this. So I would have to assume it's going to get some sort of distribution, whether it's, it's not ESPN 30 for 30 documentary, but I would not be shocked if maybe ESPN airs this, or, on ABC or something like that, where this is definitely going to get some eyeballs on it later. Yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating topic. Like, it really is. It's a fascinating discussion, and similar to some of the movies that came out in the last year, like Trial of Chicago 7, The Five Bloods. What's the other one? I'm thinking Ma Rainey's Black Bottom. It's like you don't need to change too much to show, like, to make it modern day. Unfortunately, like a lot of the issues that were prevalent during the time periods of those movies still prevalent today, and I think that's where that 1968 Olympics, like, it's still very, very topical, unfortunately, but it is. So yeah, maybe I'll check it out when it's out and see if I agree with your outrage. That was a very funny when you sent me that, just saying like, I got thoughts, and I was like, oh, interesting, this is gonna be great. I was like, I'll definitely catch up with this one. And I was like, oh, okay, never mind then. Well, that wraps up our Hot Docs coverage for 2021. Make sure you check out all of our reviews on ContraZoomPod.com and RachelKH.com. Is there anything else you wanna plug here, Rachel?
Not to plug, but I have a question for you. Is which one was your favorite? Did you have a favorite?
Oh, I would probably say Come Back Anytime, followed by Set. What about you?
Set was probably my definitely my favorite. That was it entertained me greatly, and then got me thinking for many days afterwards. So Set was probably my favorite.
Awesome. Yeah. So like I mentioned earlier, make sure you check out Rachel's review. There's going to be a link to that in the show notes, of course, where you can find our reviews. Follow the show on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at ContraZoomPod. And if you happen to see anything during Hot Docs, let us know. Send an email to ContraZoomPod@gmail.com. Thank you to Eric and Kevin Smale for the theme music, and to Stephanie Pryor for the logo design. If you can rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts, it will be a huge help for us to grow and find new listeners. Thanks for listening.